What if everything Prince William thought he knew about his family's legacy was shattered in a single phone call? Behind the sealed doors of a private royal chamber, a revelation surfaced: 3 hidden codicils quietly added to the Queen Mother's will. And the most shocking detail of all, they overwhelmingly benefit Catherine. In that instant, the future king wasn't just surprised, he was stunned, conflicted, and forced to question what had been concealed for decades. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The call itself was brief, almost clinical, yet it carried the weight of generations. William had been summoned, not invited. There was no explanation offered over the line, only the firm insistence that his presence was required for a confidential legal clarification. For a man raised within protocol, that phrasing alone signaled something serious. He had grown accustomed to ceremony, to measured announcements and carefully timed disclosures. But this felt different. This felt abrupt. And beneath that composure he was known for, something uneasy stirred. Inside that private briefing, the atmosphere was heavy with restrained significance. 3 codicils, 3 deliberate amendments had been discovered attached to the Queen Mother's will, added quietly in the final stretch of her life. Not publicized, not hinted at, not even whispered beyond a narrow legal circle. William listened as the language was read aloud, each clause tightening around his understanding of the past. These were not sentimental tokens or minor redistributions. They were decisive adjustments, crafted with clarity and foresight, and woven through each amendment was one unmistakable thread: Catherine. The wording strengthened her future standing in ways no one had anticipated. Expanded access to private trusts, symbolic custodianship over historic holdings, subtle but powerful endorsements embedded between formal legal phrases. It was as though the Queen Mother had reached across time and placed her hand directly upon Catherine's shoulder, elevating her not just in inheritance, but in intention. William felt pride rise within him, fierce and protective. Yet alongside that pride was something more complicated. Why had he never known? Why had no signal been given that such sweeping faith had been placed in his wife? He was a son of tradition, raised to honor hierarchy and precedent. But here was precedent quietly reshaped. His loyalty to the crown collided with his loyalty to Catherine, and for a fleeting moment, the balance felt fragile. Palace insiders, careful with their words, suggested the move had been intentional, even strategic. The Queen Mother, they implied, was never impulsive. If she made these changes late in life, it was because she believed the monarchy's survival required it. That suggestion hung in the air like a warning. Whispers began almost immediately within the inner circle. Some were stunned, others were wary. A few questioned why the codicils had remained concealed for so long. Had someone chosen silence to avoid controversy? Or had the Queen Mother herself insisted on secrecy until the timing was unavoidable? William could sense it, the quiet recalibration already underway. The revelation did not simply honor Catherine, it shifted gravitational pull within the royal orbit. And as the implications settled into his thoughts, one truth became impossible to ignore: this was not a footnote in history. It was a pivot. The codicils hinted at a deeper awareness, a recognition that the monarchy's next era would demand resilience of a different kind, perhaps embodied in Catherine more than anyone had openly admitted. William's shock began to transform into something heavier, more contemplative. If the Queen Mother had seen this future so clearly, what else had she foreseen? But the question that echoed louder than the legal language itself was this: why would the Queen Mother wait until the final chapter of her life to rewrite the rules? For decades, the Queen Mother was seen as the gentle matriarch of stability. But what if she was quietly orchestrating the monarchy's future long before anyone realized? The 3 codicils weren't impulsive. They were precise, calculated, and perhaps even prophetic. As legal experts dissected the language, one thing became clear: this was not merely an inheritance adjustment. It was a strategic endorsement of Catherine's long-term destiny. The image the public cherished was comforting, a grandmotherly presence, smiling through eras of triumph and turmoil, offering continuity in uncertain times. But beneath that warmth may have lived a sharper instinct, one honed by decades of witnessing the monarchy bend under pressure, Those who studied her private decisions began to reconsider everything. The codicils were not emotional afterthoughts scribbled in fading years. They were structured with intention. Each sentence carried the tone of someone who had observed patterns, measured personalities, and quietly chosen her successor in spirit long before the institution was ready to admit it. The timing alone was telling. These amendments were introduced during a season of turbulence within the royal household, a period marked by shifting alliances, generational divides, and public scrutiny, more relentless than ever before. The Queen Mother had seen crises come and go, but this era felt different. The monarchy was no longer insulated by reverence alone. It was being evaluated, questioned, and dissected by a modern world. And in that climate, the codicils read less like gifts and more like safeguards. They expanded Catherine's access to private trusts, strengthened her ceremonial standing, and subtly elevated her authority in matters once reserved for older bloodlines. It was not loud, it was not theatrical, it was surgical. More striking still was the language woven into the legal phrasing. There were no grand declarations, no overt proclamations of favoritism. Instead, there were deliberate acknowledgements of continuity, steadfast character, and future stewardship, words chosen carefully, words that hinted the Queen Mother believed Catherine embodied a resilience the monarchy would desperately need. It was as if she had studied the fractures forming beneath the surface, the rivalries, the misunderstandings, the quiet resentments, and decided that the crown's stability required reinforcement from someone who balanced tradition with adaptability. There was emotional gravity in that choice. The Queen Mother had outlived wars, abdications, scandals, and sweeping change. For her to entrust so much symbolic weight to Catherine suggested more than admiration. It suggested conviction. In Catherine, she may have seen not only grace but endurance, not only diplomacy but steel beneath composure. And perhaps, in private reflection, she recognized that the institution would one day depend less on rigid hierarchy and more on emotional intelligence, restraint, and unshakable steadiness. Yet within this reverent recalibration lay a quieter truth. The codicils did not distribute benefits evenly. Some branches of the family were conspicuously absent from these enhancements. Certain expectations were left unfulfilled. The balance shifted, even if politely, and in royal circles, even subtle shifts carry consequences. What one woman gains, another inevitably loses. As experts continued to analyze the documents, admiration for the Queen Mother's foresight deepened. She appeared less like a ceremonial relic of a bygone era, and more like a strategist who understood that the crown survives not by clinging to the past, but by preparing for the future. But foresight, however wise, rarely lands without discomfort, and as admiration for the Queen Mother's foresight grew, so did the uncomfortable realization that others may feel quietly sidelined. 3 documents, 3 signatures, 3 shifts in power. What looked like legal footnotes were, in truth, tectonic plates moving beneath the monarchy's foundation. The codicils didn't merely enhance Catherine's benefits, they rebalanced influence within the royal ecosystem. And for Prince William, the realization struck deeper than expected. This wasn't just about money, it was about legacy, symbolism, and control. As the implications unfolded, it became clear that the amendments stretched far beyond ceremonial courtesy. Catherine's access to historic estates properties, layered with ancestral meaning, was expanded in ways rarely granted to someone not yet crowned. Discretionary funds, once filtered through rigid seniority, were redirected with surprising clarity. These were not decorative privileges. They were levers of quiet authority. Whoever guided those estates and resources shaped philanthropic priorities, public presence, and long-term institutional tone. In royal life, influence rarely shouts, it whispers through access. Even more striking was the transfer of oversight tied to charitable trusts, long associated with older generations. Foundations once stewarded by figures whose names carried decades of weight were now, through carefully structured language, placed within Catherine's orbit. That shift signaled trust, but also transition. It suggested the Queen Mother did not see the future as an extension of the past, but as a recalibration. Catherine was no longer simply supporting the crown. She was by NG positioned to shape it. Then came the Heirlooms, Objects steeped in symbolism, traditionally reserved for senior bloodlines, were reallocated with subtle yet unmistakable intent. These were not mere jewels or artifacts. They were embodiments of continuity. Passing them to Catherine before her time was a statement written in gold and history. It hinted that the Queen Mother saw legitimacy not as a birthright alone, but as something earned through composure, endurance, and loyalty under scrutiny. For William, this realization was both empowering and destabilizing. He had always understood his destiny. He was the future king, shaped for leadership since childhood. Yet here was evidence that his reign, when it arrived, would be inextricably intertwined with Catherine's strengthened standing. The Codicils elevated her not beside him, but with him. It was a partnership etched into legal permanence, and while he admired her strength, he also had to confront what this meant for his own authority. Did this redistribution amplify their unity, or did it quietly redefine the hierarchy he had inherited? Within the broader family, tension lingered beneath polite smiles. No confrontations erupted, no declarations were made, but subtle recalculations took place. Conversations grew measured, roles were reconsidered. When power shifts even symbolically, everyone feels the tremor. Some interpreted the Codicils as necessary modernization. Others wondered whether tradition had been bent too far. Official statements from the palace leaned heavily on one word: continuity. The narrative emphasized stability, reassurance, the idea that nothing fundamental had changed. But insiders recognized the careful choreography behind that messaging. Continuity can sometimes be a shield for transformation. And in this case, transformation had already begun. Speculations intensified that the Codicils were more than strategic planning, they were a message. A final directive from a matriarch who understood that the monarchy survives only by anticipating its own vulnerabilities. Perhaps this was her way of safeguarding the institution against fractures she foresaw. Perhaps it was a warning disguised as generosity. For William and Catherine, the weight of that possibility lingered. The amendments were not random strokes of legal ink. They were deliberate signals, and as the palace worked to smooth the narrative, those signals continued to echo within private corridors, hinting that the balance of influence had permanently shifted. Yet behind the polished palace statements, the emotional undercurrents were only beginning to surface. For the world, Prince William maintained composure, but behind closed doors, the future king faced a storm of emotion. Pride in Catherine, eye at the Queen Mother's faith, and a subtle sting: why hadn't he been told sooner? The Codicils were more than paperwork. They were a reminder that even heirs to the throne are sometimes the last to know. And in that silence, William confronted questions he had never dared to ask. At first, he resisted the full weight of it. Disbelief is a quiet defense, and it wrapped around him in those early hours. He reread the language in his mind, replayed the phrasing, searching for ambiguity that was not there. 3 amendments, clear intent, Catherine's name anchored firmly within them. It felt almost surreal. The Queen Mother had always been steady, reassuring, traditional, yet this was bold, strategic. It suggested she had been thinking several moves ahead, even while others believed the board was unchanged. Gradually, disbelief gave way to acceptance. Not the calm acceptance of indifference, but the heavier kind, the kind that forces you to adjust your understanding of the past. William began to see the Codicils as a slight against him, but as a profound endorsement of the woman he chose to stand beside. That realization stirred something fierce inside him. His protective instinct sharpened. If Catherine had been entrusted with such weight, then she would inevitably face scrutiny. Praise, yes, but also suspicion. Admiration, but also resentment. And he knew how quickly admiration can turn when power shifts in royal circles. In private, away from the formality that defines their public lives, he and Catherine spoke with a rare vulnerability. There was no script, no advisors, just 2 people absorbing a legacy that had unexpectedly grown larger. She did not celebrate, she did not boast. If anything, she seemed unsettled by the scale of the trust placed upon her. That humility struck him deeply. It confirmed what the Queen Mother must have seen: strength wrapped in restraint. Catherine understood the symbolic gravity of the Codicils. she also understood the cost. William voiced the fear he would never admit publicly. What if this fuels division? What if other branches interpret it as favoritism? Royal unity has always been fragile beneath its polished exterior. A redistribution of influence, however carefully crafted, can ignite quiet rivalries. He worried not for himself but for her, for the whispers that might follow, for the narratives that would try to pit loyalty against ambition. And yet, amid the uncertainty, another truth crystallized. The Queen Mother had not chosen Catherine lightly. She had observed her for years through relentless headlines, relentless expectation, relentless pressure. She had seen composure under strain, grace under attack, loyalty without theatrics. The Codicils were not impulsive affection, they were recognition. That recognition reshaped how William viewed his own future. If the monarchy was evolving, then their partnership would define its tone. He began to question how the public would interpret this shift. Would they see a united front strengthened by generational faith, or would they sense imbalance? The answer was unclear, and that uncertainty lingered like an approaching storm. What he did know was this: nothing would feel quite the same again. The revelation had deepened his bond with Catherine, but it had also expanded their shared responsibility. The Codicils were no longer just documents, they were a silent directive, a call to rise. And while William wrestled with emotion, Catherine found herself at the center of a legacy she never asked to inherit. Catherine had long carried herself with quiet dignity, but the Codicils elevated her from admired consort to architect of tomorrow's monarchy. Overnight, whispers turned into headlines. Was this the Queen Mother's ultimate endorsement, or a test? As Catherine absorbed the weight of the revelation, one truth crystallized. This wasn't a reward. It was responsibility. While speculation surged beyond palace walls, Catherine's reaction was measured, almost serene. There was no visible triumph, no subtle shift in posture to signal elevation. If anything, she grew more deliberate. Those closest to her noticed the stillness in her response, a stillness that did not suggest indifference, but calculation. She understood that power in royal life is rarely about volume. It is about steadiness. The Codicils had placed her at the center of a narrative she had not authored, yet she refused to let that narrative define her tone. The expansion of charitable oversight quickly became one of the most consequential outcomes. Foundations once guided by seasoned royal hands were now entrusted to her strategic vision. This was not symbolic pageantry. It was influence with tangible impact. The direction of funding, the prioritization of causes, the long-term partnerships, all of IT now carried her imprint. It was a subtle but decisive shift. With every meeting, every endorsement, Catherine was no longer simply representing the crown. She was shaping its future conscience. Then there were the heirlooms, objects passed directly to her, steeped in generational meaning. They were more than treasures, they were statements. Each piece carried a whisper of expectation, a reminder that the Queen Mother had seen something enduring in her. Catherine understood the symbolism immediately. To accept those items was to accept the message behind them, that continuity would depend not just on bloodline, but on character. She felt the gravity of that trust settle quietly into her resolve. Within the palace, subtle recalibrations followed. Staff who once filtered decisions through established hierarchies began seeking her counsel more directly. Schedules reflected her expanded scope. Advisors listened with heightened attentiveness. It was not dramatic, it was gradual. But in royal structures, gradual change can be the most transformative. Catherine's strengthened authority did not dismantle tradition, it wove itself into it. Outside, the public conversation intensified. Commentators began framing her as a queen-in-waiting in spirit, suggesting that the Codicils had revealed what many already believed, that her influence extended beyond title. Praise was abundant, but so was scrutiny. Some applauded the Queen and others' foresight. Others questioned whether favoritism had quietly reshaped balance within the family. Catherine was aware of both currents. Admiration can uplift, but expectation can suffocate. In private reflection, she made a decision that would define her path forward. She would honor the vision implied in those amendments, not with ambition, but with discipline. She would not chase validation or respond to critics with defensiveness. Instead, she would de-embody the steadiness that had earned such profound trust. strength without spectacle, authority without arrogance. Yet beneath that composure lingered an awareness that empowerment often invites resistance. The Codicils had altered perception, and perception in royal life can be as powerful as decree. Catherine knew that her rise would not go unchallenged forever. The question was not whether tension would surface, but when. But in royal households, empowerment rarely arrives without consequence. Not everyone celebrated the Codicils. Behind palace corridors, voices lowered, conversations paused when doors opened. The redistribution of influence, however subtle, had ripple effects. Some wondered whether the Queen Mother had sent a signal about the monarchy's future direction. Others questioned whether the benefits tipped the balance too far. And in that uncertainty, alliances quietly shifted. In private circles, surprise was the most common reaction, though it was rarely spoken outright. Senior figures who had long operated within established hierarchies found themselves reassessing their footing. They had respected Catherine, admired her discipline, even supported her rising visibility, but this was different. This was structural. The Codicils did not merely enhance her profile, they altered the architecture of influence. And when architecture shifts, even slightly, everyone feels the tremor beneath their carefully placed steps. Ceremonial roles began to recalibrate almost invisibly. Invitations were reconsidered, representation at certain engagements subtly adjusted. Decisions that once flowed predictably through older channels now carried Catherine's input earlier in the process. It was not a hostile takeover. It was evolution unfolding in real time. Yet for those accustomed to fixed order, evolution can feel unsettling. The monarchy thrives on continuity, but contold, annuity is fragile when due gravity enters the room. Financial implications deepened the complexity. Estate planning, trust distributions, long-term allocations, matters typically discussed in hushed, technical language suddenly held political weight. If Catherine's access expanded, others' margins inevitably narrowed. No public disputes erupted. No statements of objection surfaced. But within quiet consultations, questions lingered. Was this a necessary modernization? Or had a boundary quietly been crossed? Outwardly, unity remained intact. Appearances were polished. Smiles were measured. Joint engagements projected harmony. Yet beneath that composed exterior, tension simmered in restrained silence. The Codicils had introduced ambiguity, and ambiguity is dangerous within institutions built on clarity of rank. Some suspected the secrecy surrounding the amendments was intentional. Why had they remained concealed until now? Who had known and who had not? Speculation moved carefully, like a current beneath still water. William found himself in the center of this delicate recalibration. He understood both sides. He recognized the necessity of honoring the Queen Mother's foresight. Yet he also sensed the unease threading through extended family conversations. Diplomacy became his quiet burden. He listened more than he spoke. He reassured without over-promising. He protected Catherine without isolating her further. It was a balancing act that demanded restraint and emotional intelligence. For a man raised in tradition, navigating this subtle power shift required a different kind of leadership, less command, more calibration. And through it all, a growing realization took hold. This revelation might not be the climax, but the beginning. The Codicils had surfaced unexpectedly, but what if they were part of a larger pattern? What if the Queen Mother's foresight extended beyond 30 SA3 documents? The thought lingered in private conversations, in cautious glances, in the silence between sentences. The monarchy has survived by adapting quietly, often without public acknowledgement. Perhaps this was another such adaptation, one misunderstood in its early stages. Perhaps the tension itself was evidence of transformation at work. Yet the deeper experts examined the documents, the clearer it became that this was never about rivalry. It was about preservation. What if the Queen Mother wasn't favouring Catherine, but fortifying the crown? Legal scholars and royal historians began to see a pattern. Each codicil strengthened the institution by strengthening its most adaptable figure. Catherine represented continuity without rigidity, tradition without stagnation. And perhaps, in her, the Queen Mother saw the evolution the monarchy would one day require. As analysts revisited the language with cooler minds, a broader narrative began to emerge. The codicils were not emotional gestures wrapped in nostalgia. They read like safeguards, carefully constructed guardrails designed to steady the monarchy through uncertain terrain. By widening Catherine's authority in strategic areas, the Queen Mother may have been insulating the institution against future instability. It was less about preference and more about preparedness. Strengthen the one who can absorb pressure. Empower the one who can translate heritage into relevance. Catherine's approach had always been deliberate. She embraced tradition, yet she understood the rhythm of a changing public. She did not chase attention, but she commanded it through restraint. In moments of controversy, she rarely reacted impulsively. That steadiness, once interpreted as quiet compliance, now looked like disciplined leadership. The codicils acknowledged that leadership. They aligned her modern sensibility with the monarchy's need for endurance. In a world where scrutiny never sleeps, adaptability is survival. William began to see this shift not as a challenge to his destiny, but as reinforcement of it. A future reign is not built on a single figure, it rests on partnership. If Catherine's influence expanded, it did not diminish him, it fortified their unity. The Queen Mother's foresight suddenly appeared less mysterious and more strategic. She had not bypassed tradition. She had strengthened its next guardians. That realization eased the lingering tension in William's thoughts. What once felt like exclusion now felt like empowerment shared. There was something profoundly emotional in that generational trust. The Queen Mother, shaped by crises few could imagine, had placed quiet confidence in Catherine's resilience. It was a message written across decades. Survival demands evolution. By entrusting Catherine with expanded stewardship, she was acknowledging that the crown must adapt without fracturing. The symbolism ran deeper than estates or heirlooms. It was about legacy transferred not just by lineage, but by capability. Gradually, public perception began to recalibrate. What had initially sparked whispers of favoritism evolved into admiration for foresight. Commentators who once questioned the secrecy of the codicils began framing them as visionary. Catherine's composure under mounting expectation reinforced that narrative. She did not overstep. She did not retreat. She moved steadily, embodying the balance the Queen Mother may have hoped for all along. And beneath this growing clarity lingered a quieter truth. The Queen Mother had lived long enough to witness upheaval. She understood that crises arrive without warning. Family fractures, public disillusionment, generational tension, none of it was theoretical. Perhaps the codicils were her preemptive answer to challenges, not yet fully visible. A protective measure disguised as inheritance. History often judges bold decisions harshly in their early stages, only to vindicate them with time. The Queen Mother's amendments may follow that same arc. What once seemed disruptive now appeared strategic. What once felt personal now revealed institutional wisdom, and as understanding replaced confusion, Prince William's stunned reaction transformed into something far more powerful. The shock has faded, but its echo remains. What began as a startling discovery evolved into a revelation about destiny. Prince William now sees the codicils not as a surprise, but as a signal. The Queen Mother didn't disrupt tradition, she recalibrated it. And in doing so, she handed Catherine not just benefits, but belief. The monarchy's next chapter may already have been written quietly, deliberately, and decades ahead of its time. In the days that followed the initial upheaval, something shifted inside William. The tension that once tightened his thoughts began to loosen, replaced by a steadier understanding. He no longer viewed the codicils as hidden maneuvers or withheld truths. Instead, he began to see them as an act of confidence, an unspoken declaration that the monarchy's endurance would depend on partnership, not solitary power. The Queen Mother had not bypassed him. She had fortified the union that would define his reign. That realization did not diminish his authority, it deepened it. Embracing her faith in Catherine required humility, and William met that moment with resolve. He recognized that leadership in a modern monarchy demands more than inheritance. It demands trust, earned, demonstrated, and shared. The codicils symbolized that trust. They affirmed what he had long known privately. Catherine's steadiness was not ornamental. It was foundational. And in accepting that affirmation, He allowed the shock to transform into gratitude. Their partnership strengthened in quiet but unmistakable ways. Conversations grew more intentional. Decisions carried an awareness of legacy beyond personal ambition. They were no longer simply navigating public expectation. They were shaping a long-term vision. The Queen Mother's amendments acted as both endorsement and responsibility, urging them to lead with unity rather than hierarchy. The monarchy, often perceived as rigid, now felt poised for thoughtful evolution. Clarity replaced confusion. The Codicils reframed their shared mission, not as guardians of tradition alone, but as interpreters of it. They understood that the world watching them had changed. Transparency, once seen as risk, began to appear as strength. If the institution was to thrive, it could no longer rely solely on mystique. It would require measured openness, emotional intelligence, and deliberate alignment. The Queen Mother's foresight suggested she understood that reality long before the headlines demanded it. Public curiosity intensified, not with hostility, but with fascination. Global attention returned to the monarchy with renewed intrigue. Commentators debated the implications. Supporters celebrated the symbolic reinforcement of Catherine's role. Critics speculated about future disclosures. Yet amid the noise, William and Catherine remained focused. They knew that influence sustained through spectacle fades quickly. Influence sustained through consistency endures. Emotionally, the journey had come full circle. What began with disbelief ended in profound recognition. The Queen Mother's amendments were not a disruption of order, they were an investment in resilience. William no longer carried the sting of being the last to know. Instead, he carried the weight of being entrusted with something larger than protocol. The responsibility to honor a vision crafted decades earlier. And a lingering question hovered at the edges of certainty. If 3 codicils had quietly reshaped the monarchy's internal balance, what else might remain undiscovered? What other safeguards, conversations, or intentions lay beneath the surface of royal history? The possibility itself carried both mystery and promise. The codicils may have been the first revelation, but not the final one. Because in the world of royalty, the greatest power shifts are rarely announced, they are discovered. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.